So we do want to welcome everybody to this online public forum, part of the Central Iowa Community Broadband, or I should say the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study. And this is the second one today, and that's the first time I've really misspoken, so I'll count that as a win. We really want to thank everybody for joining us for this session. It's the challenges of learning from home. And again, this is the part of a group of 4 online public forums that we're doing as part of the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study. My name is Curtis Dean, and I'm one of the consultants that is working together to gather data here about broadband in the 11 county region of Central Iowa. And joining me as our co-moderator, Todd Kilkoff, and he is also a member of the consulting team. We both live here in Central Iowa, as our presenters and our panelists do too. So we want to thank you guys for coming on. We also want to let you know that we have an opportunity for you to ask questions or even raise your hand and speak if you'd like. If you aren't familiar with the Zoom platform, there's a Q&A window on the bottom of your screen below the pictures of us that you can click and type in a question, and we'll answer those as they come up. You can also do it through the chat function that is also built into Zoom. Or if you're really brave and you want to actually talk, you raise your hand, we'll call on you, and we'll activate your microphone so that you can join us in the discussion. And again, we do want to have as much discussion as we can here today. We'll try to get things wrapped up within an hour, and if it goes a little long or a little short, then that will be how it works. So welcome again, everybody. I'd like to introduce our panelists here that we have on the call right now. We are hoping to have one more joining us. Must be running just a little late, but Kendra Alexander is the Director of Student Services at Winterset Community School District. Thanks for coming on, Kendra. Appreciate it. And Joel Lundstrom is one of the leaders of the online learning team at Des Moines Area Community College. Joel, thanks again for being part of our discussion. We'll also have a recorded interview that I did earlier this week with the superintendent at Pella Community Schools, Gregebeling. He is knee deep in tulips right now. As you can imagine, it's tulip time in Pella, so he could not be here live, but we had a great discussion earlier this week, and I'll share that with you here in a little bit. So before we really begin the panel discussion about remote learning, I'm going to turn to Todd for just a second and have him talk about what the goals are of the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Study and the survey connected to it.
Sure. The study itself has multiple phases in it that kind of are all interrelated. So we start with trying to get hard data about where people have service, where they don't. There's a mapping component to all this, where we're able to visualize where there's gaps in the region, because there are mapping tools available to providers, but they're really not down to the granular level enough to know where people are really having gaps. And also then we're layering in information about where people are satisfied or not satisfied about how their performance of their internet is. And then be able to really cross-tabulate that data to say, okay, this tier of service just isn't working for people. So we're going to have that component. Then there's an economic assessment component to where we say, okay, we have these gaps. How's it really impacting the region? We have a firm called Baton Global who does those large level economics analysis. And so we look at education, we look at health, look at work from home, economic development, those things. And then try to give all that data kind of a residual home. And so the region can monitor its competitiveness over time about how things are going well or not going well and what those impacts are. And also then allow providers to see where there's market gaps and find virtual marketplaces at the micro level where they might be able to extend networks affordably if they know that there's a group of customers there that are underserved or unserved. So, you know, it's a comprehensive viewpoint. These meetings are helpful because we want the public to be aware that we're not just always looking at how the internet is used in their minds, is how people who are professionals trying to deliver services to various subsets of our community are seeing the barriers. Because for Curtis and I just always say, well, we know the internet always does this, or this is what's important. That it's not, it's what your stories are.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important. So somewhat of what we do here is give those stories a voice. We'll use these in links and teachers say, listen, your industry says this is important to fix, and try to make that story compelling.
Sorry, I'm gonna leave.
I'm gonna turn it over back to you, Curtis, and you can introduce our next guest.
All right. Well, I was going to recognize our other panelist who was able to join us, Isaiah Knox, but I think Isaiah's figuring out some audio problems. So there you are.
Yes, sorry.
Hey, no problem. How are you?
That's good. I had a power outage at my house, so I was on my phone and I switched over. The computer's back up. So
okay,
there you go.
Fantastic.
Good
so
topic.
It was a power outage, not necessarily the internet, although you kind of need one to have the other, right?
Right.
Great. Well, as long as we got you here, Isaiah, just talk a little bit about your role at Urban Dreams and what Urban Dreams does and what your mission is.
Yeah, Urban Dreams, really our mission is to build bridges for non-traditional and traditional organizations and communities to interact in a positive way. And we do that in about 5 different areas. We have a full service food pantry. So that's one of them that really gets people to come in to then talk about, build relationships with other programs that we have, like our substance abuse program. So we're a full service outpatient substance abuse treatment center. We have a full-time in-person counselor and a full-time digital counselor from providing mental health services at our office. We also do obviously the telehealth substance abuse evaluations and treatment statewide. For our OWI jail diversion classes especially. We have workforce development programming. We partner with Des Moines Public Schools to do a lot of educational pieces with their most at-risk students, which is the Deferred Expulsion Program. And then we do a lot of cultural competency training with organizations, schools, clients going into the workforce, workforce organizations that we partner with that are hiring people. So that's really the buckets of work that we work in.
That's a lot of buckets.
It's quite a few.
That's great. And we're going to come back to you in a little bit and talk about the bucket that relates to education, which is certainly something you guys are involved with. I wanted to start with the kind of the K through 12 perspective here with you, Kendra, as you, of course, are part of your district's leadership team and responsible for getting kids the learning that they need in what has been a very, very, very challenging past year, and really almost 2 full school years here. What was remote learning really much even on your radar screen when COVID became a reality?
No, definitely not on my radar. I mean, our teachers have been using Google Classroom for a while, but really while the kids are physically in their room. So we really have not had any remote learning going on prior to COVID.
Okay. So since this was kind of all a shock to the system, everybody had to adapt, obviously, very quickly.
Mhm.
And in the case of a school district, you kind of had 2 challenges. You not only had to figure out the connectivity in from the school district, right? How
Mhm.
can we have the connectivity we need to provide that service to the students at home? But you also had to kind of deal with helping those students get that connectivity at the home. That had to be quite a tough road for a while.
Right. I would say it was very challenging. Our school district takes up a lot of square miles, and a lot of it is very rural areas. So I think it just, put shone a light on the discrepancies between rural areas and in the town. And there are just some areas, I mean, I probably spent hundreds of hours talking to families and providers, trying to find one that would get service in their area. And then the cost was a barrier. And a lot of the small towns around us are much cheaper to live in. So people that live there might have a lower socioeconomic status, and so they might
Right.
not have the resources to pay for the internet, even if they could get service. I mean, there are some literal dead zones I found out in our school district in some pretty remote rural areas. So yeah, that was a pretty big hurdle, I would say. And then to start this school year, making sure everybody had a plan, or would have access to internet for if we did have to go virtual, was a challenge as well. We did buy some, I don't know if this question's coming up, but we did buy some hotspots that work for some, but not all.
Mm-hmm.
I was also able to write a T-Mobile grant for their project 10 million, and actually get 50 hotspots for
Great.
free with, I think, just 100 megs, I don't know, of data. So if a kid goes on, I don't know if they're correct.
Well,
I'm
that's
not a
okay.
tech person. So also in a small district, I think you wear a lot of hats, like I don't know anything about internet. I mean, my background is special education. So I think, but our tech guys, we're so busy trying to get devices out and make sure everybody had what they needed.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went on the student services side of my job to make sure that everybody could get connected.
Now your school district, do you have a one-to-one program for devices?
We do. We had first through 12th grade with Chromebooks.
Okay.
But when this happened, we added iPads for kindergarten. So yeah, now
Okay.
we're one-to-one all the way through.
Great. And of course, those devices, I mean, that's always one of the challenges, right? When we look at people adapting to broadband, one of the challenges is, do they have a device to use?
Mhm.
We talked early in our earlier session about, that some communities are not as able to afford a device, right? So with school kids, a lot of school districts have stepped up and really addressed that, like yours has. But then
Mhm.
it's that connectivity on the other end.
Right.
And you mentioned some dead zones, so to speak,
Mhm.
in your district. Were those the areas that the hotspots were going to, or was that a combination of no internet even available versus mom and dad can't afford it?
A combination.
Okay.
Hotspots went first. We tried, the first line of defense for everybody was the MediaCom Connect to Compete. I think $10 a month for kids on free and reduced lunch. So that has been amazing for a lot of our families, but it only goes so far, out of town.
Right.
So then after that, we looked at hotspots, and some areas don't even get hotspot service. Like they have to go to the top of the hill and sit in their car and do their
Yeah.
work. I mean, as if there's not enough barriers. Now you have to go.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So, so I found some places that there's no, obviously, MediaCom, and I don't even know all the kinds of internet, no
Sure.
CenturyLink, but also a hotspot would not work in those areas.
Yeah.
So then it was, yeah, go ahead.
You've had to, school districts have to be very agile to try to adapt here in the past year. And,
Mhm.
while we're going to talk a little bit in just a few minutes about moving forward, what that looks like, assuming we can all get back to a somewhat normal lifestyle with COVID being hopefully put aside. But that's going to certainly have an impact moving forward, as we've learned a lot
Mhm.
about how to educate or at least attempt to educate children at home. And so we'll have to talk a little bit about what those look like going forward.
Hey, Kendra,
Go ahead, Todd.
could you describe a little bit about your perspective or the teacher's perspective of the learning experience between having a good connection versus a bad? So if we take the no connection aside, I'm not sure that it's fully understood about the learning experience challenges that a bad connection brings, because you have to assume that, like we did through COVID, that everybody has to go through the possibility of a quarantine.
Mhm.
So can you describe that just from either a teacher's perspective on the learning?
Yeah, I would say a bad connection might make it almost harder than having no connection. A bad connection, you're cutting in and out. You get some of the lesson, not all of it. It may be recorded, it may not be. You might not be able to stream, the video part, or, it's just, um, it'd almost be, better. I mean, we've had families sitting outside the library.
Yeah.
I mean, sitting outside our buildings trying to do their schoolwork when we were closed. So yeah, it's almost like, I don't know, it's almost better that they do that, which is such a barrier for especially a lot of families where school might not come first. Um, and they have many other things to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing they want to do is come sit outside in their car and listen to their kid's lesson. Um, so yeah, but that might be the only way they could get it, uninterrupted.
We might all learn a little bit if we listen to our kids' lessons. Let's put it that way.
That's for sure.
Isaiah, the youth that your organization works with, I would assume that many of them are at-risk youth. They're in various distressed situations. Is access to broadband been a challenge for those youth when it comes to not only just learning, right? We're focusing on learning here, but it's also about lifestyle. It's also about employment. It's also about just enhancing your life. Has that been a challenge for the at-risk youth that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, I tell people all the time, one of the things about the population that we work with, especially the young people, is this kind of disruption in their life is unfortunately normal, right? Stuff that they deal with. So they're very resilient, right? But they can never seem to catch up. And this was just another one of those things that held them back. So the digital divide is a real thing. I mean, all the research shows that it's real.
Yeah.
And yes, I mean, logging on, having access, right? We boosted our Wi-Fi outside of our building so that people could drive up and use a strong signal, or they could come into our office because we stayed open during this entire time and let people come in and use computers and all those things, and helped people to navigate the 4 different platforms they had to navigate to get to one thing, to I have the lesson done, but how do I submit it? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, all those things. Yeah, it was very difficult. It continues to be difficult, even with the hybrid now, or the, all the different options. Yes, it's very difficult.
Did you find, or have you found that just device literacy is an issue or a challenge? I mean, the reason I mention that is we've talked a lot over the years about, how our cell phones have become, well, you can't see it because it's invisible, but our cell phones have become.
That's a new one.
Yes, it's the new iPhone Stealth. We've talked a lot about how people have become so dependent on their cell phones, and how a significant portion of the population, that's their only experience with technology, is that cell phone. But when it comes to a child trying to do a lesson, it's not the best environment for that. So I would assume you're seeing that at the folks that you work with on a regular basis.
Yes. So most people that we work with, the FaceTime is probably the most equivalent they've had to working on Zoom or Teams or whatever before, right? So we had to get them over to understand these new platforms and how to use them. And yes, you're right. Their keyboarding skills are terrible because they're typing everything with their thumbs. So navigating that, using mouse and, keyboard, all those things. Yeah, it was shocking on how technologically savvy they are in some aspects, but really not savvy at all on how to use it as a tool, and not just for entertainment or for social media.
Different technology. It has its root in the same types of device or circuits and whatnot, but it's a different interface, and that's not the interface if you're used to it. That's a big adjustment. Just like it was a big adjustment for us, in some of us here that are a little bit older, that at some point we had to learn to interface with a computer, and that may or may not have been the smoothest transition ever. So Joel, I want to talk to you a little bit about the mission that you guys have as a community college and an institution of higher learning, and the online programs you have there. Now, colleges have been using online learning for a long time, but usually that was something that was a voluntary thing. The student chose to use that online environment to do distance education or whatever. Did you have some of the same challenges when everything went online for DMAC that, say, Kendra did in Winterset?
Yeah, I think we did face a lot of the same challenges. I was part of a kind of the first group of college instructors that started teaching courses online, 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did, you found that students self-selected themselves into that format if they thought they could be successful. And this is really the first time, because if we even offer a program online, we try to also offer it, of course, face-to-face or in some kind of hybrid format. And this was the first time we had to kind of take a step back and take those programs that hadn't been online yet and say, how do we finish this out? And in some areas, during a pandemic, it's even more important. So we had nursing, CNA, these are healthcare workers, first-line workers that we needed to produce graduates. The state of Iowa and our friends and family and communities needed these people to graduate. And how are we going to give them a robust experience when they can't go into a clinical site and practice those skills? And so most of the things that we didn't have online already, to be honest, it was too challenging before. And so this was the first time we had to say, okay, it was too challenging. That's why we didn't do it before, but now we need to do it. And how can we make that work? And luckily we had a great online department with instructional designers and support team. We knew enough about the technologies and had enough of the technologies already purchased and put in place that we could move a few more things to a virtual classroom setting, which we hadn't used before. And then our traditional asynchronous online format, of course, really blew up for students, and they found great support there. So the connection issues you guys are talking about, the students face, we had a lot of students that faced the exact same issues. We had students, I primarily work at the Carroll campus and have responsibilities for the Carroll campus. I also have responsibilities in the Perry Center, and the rural communities face a lot of these challenges. Not only from connectivity issues, but also just from poverty issues that face rural America as well. And so when you combine those factors, and a lot of students that are already facing a lot of roadblocks and challenges, it becomes even more critically important for us to meet their needs. So
I would imagine that there are some interesting stressors there for young adults that are trying to learn, because yes, a K through 12 student is more likely to be in a home environment, right, where mom and dad you're relying on them to have the internet service. But with young adults, you probably have more independent young adults. And if they're anything like the independent young adults that were in part of my family, they're broke all the time. So affording internet on top of tuition and books and, trying to have a social life as much as you can during COVID, that probably puts additional stress on those students, doesn't it?
You're exactly right. And that expense, to some of us, it seems like an extra $30, $40 a month to pick up a hotspot from their local provider shouldn't be very much, but it literally is the difference. They're still struggling to put gas in their car each week to come to class anyway. All these challenges add up. Right away, we did a number of things that, the federal government stepped in and helped, and state government as well too, through grants. And one of the opportunities we did right away is we said we're not having graduation last May, so we took that budget, put that towards iPads for students. We said that was intended to go towards students. Let's make sure it does that. We started buying laptops, iPads, headphones, computer monitors, a number of things for students. And probably the most critically important were hotspots. I asked DMAC to pull some numbers on this, and we'd spent over 1.1 through these different grants and $1.1 million on this equipment for students to be connected.
Wow.
And I think that says a lot about the lack of connectivity we have and the lack of resources students have, that we need to step up that need in 2021 when we think everybody is connected. We think everybody has devices where they can access their courses, but in reality, they could not. And it was life-changing for some of the students. On the hotspot front, and specifically about broadband, we have good broadband connections a lot of times in the communities that I live. Carroll County has Western Iowa Networks that steps up and meets that need very, very well for a number of communities. They can drop fiber to every home in the city. And so some students have great connectivity, but then 5 miles down the road, they might not. And we had 54 hotspots that students could check out in the district, and we thought that was meeting the need before the pandemic. And today we have 459 that they can check out. So that's how much we had to change what we do in order to support our students. And it's just we're not in a system where we can step back and say, oh, that's your challenges, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work out for you. We have to step up and help meet that need with them. And it's been a fun, it's been fun to be able to help out students and have the resources to help them out. And oftentimes in education, we haven't had those resources to meet their needs. And so it's, in one respect, it's been fun this year to finally have some extra resources to be able to meet their needs. So
It's interesting that educators or, you know, community outreach folks that deal with youth have had to rely on hotspots so much. I mean, we've found this in other communities that we've had conversations with, where it's really kind of been the lifeline that is available, because it's kind of the connection of last resort, and certainly not necessarily an ideal way to get online, right? Because it can be slow, it can be data caps, it can be, you know, drive to the top of the hill to get online. Those are all limitations of it. But if there's no other option available, which we know there isn't in some areas, then that's the best you can do.
Yep.
I also think it's interesting, and you know, Isaiah, I'd ask you to share on this too, is I think that a lot of people, whether they're decision makers or even parents in you know, some of the that are in some of the higher socioeconomic levels, they take it for granted, right? They say, oh, it's just internet. I mean, yeah, it's a big deal. It's $60 a month or whatever. But that really can kick someone's budget really in the rear end if they're not careful. And that's why it's not accessible to some people.
Yeah, the median household income in our area is 28,000, and the average household size is 4. So that's not a lot
Right.
of money for households to have extra dollars to spend on internet, hotspots. I mean, oftentimes even cell phones. You know, any kind of things that are connecting people digitally is oftentimes out of reach. So, right, those hotspots that you can check out from the schools, right? They came through and did a great job to get those things in the hands of a lot of people. But again, like you said, spotty. You know, and as we know, we talked about young people already, right? They lose things, right? I have 2 young people in my household, so there's all kind of things, right? Like they'll lose their computer in the bag and hotspot and everything. So it adds up.
Sure
Hey,
does.
Joel, I'd ask the same question about what type of feedback did you get from students on the experience and the learning impacts on a hotspot connection, maybe as compared to the students were like, hey, I love doing this online stuff. How do you think it, like, were there features of the college experience you can't do on a hotspot, or?
Yeah, actually I did, when Curtis and I talked yesterday, I did email out to students and ask them for their feedback on what their experience was this last year. And I got a lot of interesting reports about how spotty some connections are, living in rural communities, what some of the issues are, but also in some larger cities that you might be surprised on. I wouldn't feel comfortable just saying the names of the cities out loud, but you're surprised at the lack of good connectivity. And I think the demands on the system had a lot to do with when you have multiple people on the same line or in the household. You know, they always thought they had great coverage because one kid could stream a video every night and that seemed to be okay. But now that you had 3 kids doing schoolwork and 2 parents doing work, it was a lot to ask them to do. One of the students that we had on another survey that we did, she reported back to us, and I won't read you her statement, but I thought it was really interesting. She said to us that to some people it doesn't seem like much, and this is a student that would have been awarded a laptop so she could access her online courses. And she said, I've had to make massive changes and sacrifices as a single parent, an immigrant family without a family here to rely on. And when I decided to go to college, it was about ready to go up in flames just because of technology and things that are outside my control. And I thought this last part was the most interesting. She said, sometimes all your efforts are not enough without a support system. And I know that's the work that Kendra does with the students she works and with Isaiah as well. But it's really true that, you know, these students are putting forth so much effort, and to have something outside their control, mean all that effort isn't going to count. It's defeating. And it's been a challenging year for a lot of people, but it's neat to see that we're having conversations like this to help better support them to be successful in the future.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that multiple connection part about simultaneous connection need is something that I think is an emerging conversation that people need to have about having opportunities, you know, equal opportunities in terms of having the opportunity to learn and work at the same time, or some other things like that within a household that would just went under the radar. And the, but it's still there. I mean, that's the whole point, is the great things about some online learning, which I would think that would be that I can learn when maybe I can make money and learn, but if two of us can't do it at the same time in the same
Yeah.
household, then we don't have that opportunity.
Right. One of the things we're doing the survey. Oh, time to put in a plug for the survey. I think I'll do that right now. We're doing the Central Iowa Broadband Internet Survey as part of this study, and so this is the website it's on. It's on the Greater Des Moines Partnership page, but you can just go to Central Iowa Broadband Survey.com, and you're going to get this this page, which has residential and business surveys on it. But the interesting thing, I was looking up some of the statistics of the people that have answered the survey so far. Why don't you have internet at home? And 74% of the people who said they don't have internet at home, it said that price was a primary factor. Others reasons were it's not available, it's too slow, or it's too unreliable. So when we look at that, how do we connect students? There's going to be a multitude of reasons why they perhaps don't have the internet at home that they need in order to learn well, and price is one of the big ones, and that's also one of the toughest ones to tackle, because it's you know, the providers need to be able to operate efficiently and, you know, profitably. And you know, fortunately, the federal government is putting its best foot forward with the Emergency Broadband Benefit Fund, which will hopefully allow homes that are of lower income to access these subsidies to get a broadband connection at home if it's available. So,
Yeah,
go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, just for the audience benefit, typically on the first, let's say if you're doing a fiber to the home project, you know, over the first 15 years, almost 40 to 50% of that bill is to cover the debt service for building the thing.
Yeah.
Just putting things underground is expensive, and there's just no way around that. What you do want is, once it's paid for, you hope you don't have access problems because somebody wants it paid for 3 or 4 times over, you know. But typically that's a longer run of the technology. The fiber hasn't been to the home, hasn't been around long enough for that to be a problem. But to solve it with future proofing, that's where some of these access funding for lower income households helps actually get a network built. Then you can have these conversations: is it worth the societal benefits of it? And so that's why these conversations are important, so people understand that they are.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the conversation's going great so far, but I want to make sure that I have an opportunity to share the interview that I had with Gregebeling. So I'll do that now. Gregebeling is the superintendent for the Pella Community School District in Pella, Iowa, in Marion County, one of the 11 counties in the Greater Des Moines Partnership Broadband Study. Greg, thanks for coming on. Appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Curtis. I'm glad to be here. Glad to be with you.
We've had conversations in the past about broadband and its impact on education, but it's become even more important during the past year. How much or how was remote learning on your radar screen at Pella before COVID started impacting us a year ago?
Well, you know, we've experimented with some things in the past, and you know, our teachers had done some things with flipped classrooms where we actually would do some video teaching, and then that would be given to the kids to actually watch at home, and then they would come to the classroom and then actually do work in the classroom. So it would give kids more work time in the classroom. They would do some of the content through the flipped classroom environment, and so we had teachers experiment with that. But then certainly we've always had a Google Classroom connection with our teachers, and as students were wanting to make up things on days they were not in class, So that was happening, but not typically for long extended periods of time. Like, of course, we were in this year with some students, because we did have several students, about 100 students in our district, out of about 2,400 that did do completely virtual this year.
Okay.
So used several different methodologies, depending upon the level of student. Certainly, the older they are, the more self-sufficient they are, of course, and the more tech savvy they typically are, and so they're better at connecting. But teachers, of course, had to learn lots of new things this year. And we used several different camera options, ways to both tape it and do it asynchronous, where it was being taped and then sent out to students, as well as synchronous learning, where they were live in the classroom with other
Right.
students that were also live. So a little bit of each, but we certainly had some of those experiences. It was just more of a kind of an as needed, or some teachers that wanted to experiment. And this year we, of course, moved that much larger into almost all teachers.
Now, you mentioned that you had a limited number of students that did opt into 100% online instruction. I would assume that those children came from households that probably had good broadband access. Was that simply not an option for some people because of their limited broadband availability?
Well, it was, we're kind of fortunate that we have some pretty good connectivity in our community, with libraries and a few other businesses that they could grab a hold of some broadband. Um, but we also did make hotspots available to students that needed it. So that was another way. Of course, a hotspot is never quite as good, you
Right.
know, as a fiber connection, of course, just because, especially with video, it takes quite a large amount of capacity to do video well. And without that capacity, of course, it's kind of choppy and doesn't always look so great. Um, so but we did offer hotspots up to students that needed them or wanted them.
So, talk a little bit about those hot spot students, because those were students that were experiencing a gap in their ability to be online during that online instruction. Did you find that that was students who, what were the reasons for the gaps? Was it no good internet was available, or it was the price was too high, or it wasn't reliable, or what were kind of some of the reasons why you were getting why some students needed those?
Well, what's interesting is the percentage of parents that actually use their phone as their kind of primary internet connection. So there's, of course, many people that may exclusively work off their smartphone,
Right.
in terms of almost everything. And so may not even have a laptop computer or anything like that at home, but just do all the internet connectivity that way. So, of course, students that were younger and didn't have phones would, need connectivity. And so then those parents were kind of at a more difficult place, because what we just see is families spending money on an upgraded phone plan, with as fast of a connectivity as they possibly can, versus I'm spending money for an internet connection plus a phone plan. And we don't have a high percentage of students that are on free and reduced lunch, but it's still like 17%.
Mm.
So even if we're 17 to 20% of our kids, that's still 1 in 5 students that would probably not necessarily always have the means to have multiple internet access points in a home. So, and we're seeing many families that will choose, especially the more millennial parents, will choose their phone as kind of their primary access point.
Right.
And so then that kind of leaves their kids out of the loop, because unless their kids have a phone or a way to access it, they just, that they're kind of stuck.
Yeah. Were you noticing students having to be a little creative in where they got internet? For example, I know there have been school districts talk about they've lit up their parking lots so that students and their families could come and sit in the parking lot to get some learning done, or they've used other public internet avenues. Have you heard about that down in Pella?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Probably our library was probably the most popular place, because do have good internet connectivity. It stayed open pretty much
Mm,
most of the time through this school year. So that was certainly an option for students to use that. We did have some students that actually came into the school, even though they were virtual students, that they would come into the school or close to the school and actually work out of a vehicle and just grab a hold of our wireless system, which it always seemed ironic to me because they were coming to school and they were still being virtual.
right.
So kind of a little bit crazy, but yeah, it was, I mean, it worked out for the most part. We were able to get access to kids that needed it. And so our participation in terms of virtual learning was good in terms of the percentage of kids that said they were going to be virtual and then followed through. We still think it loses some of the things that are needed with face-to-face learning at times. So we still don't see it as our primary mode, but certainly has given us the skills to connect with kids in more ways than what we would have been able to prior to COVID, honestly. But internet connectivity is the critical element. You
Yeah.
just got to have it to make it work.
Come back to our panel discussion here as you heard Gregebeling, superintendent of schools of the Pella Community School District, and his perspective. A lot in common with what we've already been talking about, right? I don't think that there are a whole lot of unique items that I'm sure each school district's had a unique experience that they can share, but there's been just a lot of stuff in common. In our remaining few minutes that we have here, I first of all want to mention again to everybody, we encourage you, if you are one of our attendees, if you have a question, you can use the chat window, you can raise your hand, you can also use the Q&A functionality and raise those questions with us. And we'll get to your questions just as soon as you send them our way. I just want to kind of do a little round the room here thing for the panel. For the students that you work with or the youth you work with, what's the number one thing that you would like? What's the magic bullet, do you think, that would help you do what you do and deliver education to those students? Joel, I'll start with you.
I think for us, just sustainable funding to keep these things alive and keep these programs alive. I think we spend a lot of times trying to meet students where they're at and what their issues are. We just need to be able to do it continuously at other times of when we're not in a pandemic as well. One of the programs we have right now is if you're a Pell recipient, you can actually get reimbursed for some broadband expenses. There's an application that you can do. And so if you know of anybody that's interested in that, they should contact their school financial aid department or work with us to do it. There's a lot of opportunities like that. We've done things like, I thought it was interesting, everyone mentioned parking lots and trying to get internet that way. We've put Wi-Fi in our parking lots intentionally. That's something we're actually doing, just trying to at least provide that for people that need it. And there's just a lot of challenges, but really financial support to improve these broadband services, and then of course improve what we can deliver in terms of helping them connect is really, really important.
Great.
Yeah.
Kendra, I'll turn to you next. What's on your wish list?
Yeah, I think the money, would be great to keep the things going that we, have going, but also just reaching those super rural communities that really have no options, and may not have the gas money to drive to town and sit in the parking lot. So those were the kids that were really losing out, either when they're on quarantine this year or when we were virtual last year. So yeah, that would be my wish to get, is it fiber? Is that even possible to every house? Is that
In a
possible?
perfect world, that would be possible.
Okay, well, that's my wish.
Well, the state of Iowa is putting some major money into a broadband grant program. And although it's not specific to fiber optics, it is going to help incentivize providers to extend service where it isn't today. So certainly that's something that could come out of it.
Yeah, that would remove a huge barrier, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. Isaiah, what do you see? What's your magic bullet that you'd like to help your community that you work with?
Well, I need a 6-shooter.
So there you go.
So, and one question I have is I'm trying to figure out where you're getting the $60 a month internet from, because mine's 90.
Yeah.
So obviously money would be an issue, right? Subsidizing or even down to free would be good. Um, what more time? And when I say more time, I mean like after hour supports on these things, because I mean, I have students that I've coached in the past come to my house at 9 o'clock at night needing to use the internet, right?
Mm,
They need a space to be able to go, not a parking lot at 9 o'clock at night, a library that sometimes are closed, especially in public libraries. And then, public schools are typically, 3:30, 4 o'clock, unless you're doing extracurricular activities, they're not available. So places where they can go after hours, that be schools. I know colleges are open a little later, and some are open, libraries open much later, but those are the young adults. So what's a 7 or 8 year old to do at 9 o'clock at night? They're not going to walk the streets and sit in a car and do all that stuff. And then mentoring on how to navigate those things efficiently and effectively is one of those things, I think, as well.
that got a thumbs up from Kendra. I think mentoring is huge across the board when it comes to education, not just remote, but and it's maybe something that all of us adults could do a better job of maybe helping out with on occasion. So that's a really good thing to mention. We do have a question I want to turn to, and this is kind of addressed to everybody. So chime in if you feel like you want to add to this. Can the panelists compare and contrast the success of students based on those who have or don't have broadband service? Excellent question. Have you noticed a difference between performance, or a correlation between performance and access?
I would say absolutely, especially when they're sent home for a 2-week quarantine. Many times I'm just thinking of high schoolers, especially because, that's when we really need them to pass the class to get the credits.
Right.
That if they don't have internet connection, they're home for 2 weeks, really doing nothing. Um, but, and so then we're trying to get them hotspots or, figure out how to get them connected. Um, yeah, so I would say it's a huge, huge divide.
It makes intuitive sense, right? The interesting thing will be after we pass through COVID and things return to whatever normal becomes, if we'll have any statistical evidence of that. That's always a challenge too, right? I mean, one of the reasons we're doing this study is to try to gather statistical evidence of what we've been hearing for years, which is that people are having trouble getting on connectivity in some areas. And so we've heard these stories, and now we're trying to gather data that tells us that. But I mean, that's a great point. That, what are the after effects of COVID on this generation of youth that have had to learn through it? And do those after effects vary according to whether they were fortunate enough to have good broadband or not? That's fascinating. Joel or Isaiah, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, the only thing I would add is the one thing, I think it's different for the K through 12 system, and so I'd respect those differences. But at least on our end, we always had the question about if we did have enough resources, would we be able to help everybody get connected, and would they be able to be successful online? And the answer for us really is yes. I mean, we are able to tackle some of these issues with better resources, better money, better support. And we never really knew and understood what that last little percentage was of those that needed connection issues to do that. And now we know what that is. We know how much it would cost. We know that we could do it if we had the resources, and hopefully we'll continue to work towards getting those resources for them, because a lot of these people need to do that to be successful. And at least on our end, it's part of that giving everybody an opportunity to an education, right? And so we think it's a very noble thing to try to make sure that whatever city or town you're in, or whatever your social economic status is that you have an opportunity for higher education. And so I think we recognize the challenges better than we have before, and we can work towards them. So.
Well, education's always been the great balancer in this nation, and unfortunately, I don't think we've ever done it exactly right. But I think that it is the thing that can, at least in the right circumstances, can lift people to opportunities that otherwise they might not be exposed to or have the opportunity for. Isaiah, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think there's already some research coming out that there's going to be devastating effects on creating even more of a divide of people that have and have nots on this. I think lifetime earning loss is already being projected as, tens of thousands of, not hundreds of thousands of dollars for students. Reading levels we know have dropped already. We're looking at those things. So I think the youngest among us are the ones that are really suffering the most with even yes, there's going to be some major collateral damage due to access and broadband access and all kind of access through this pandemic.
I'm curious on the educational side, were there any successes that we should be exploiting in future, either to help remedial with the online? In other words, are there untapped potential of online, do you think, that it's going to be even a better, that we can actually use it to fix some other problems that we discovered? Or, whether that's a remedial to help out, where there's gaps, or in addition to a regular school day, or, we're also looking at the future of saying how much more important will be
Right.
in the future. That's one of the things, and we're trying to educate people and ourselves about what those tools might be. So I'd point that question to all three panelists.
Yeah, I would just add that I do think you're right. There is a lot more challenges that we have to face going forward to make that work. I have two kids at home with special needs, and their connection and their school day is severely interrupted by the pandemic.
Mhm.
And to provide them access to fair quality education is severely disrupted by just moving it online, right? Their attention span is a little bit lower. Their extra challenges of connectivity are an issue, and they really need that TA support and that teacher support. And the one thing that we weren't short of definitely during the pandemic was the number of caring teachers and the people that are willing to put in the extra time at work.
Yes.
And that says a lot about the state of Iowa, and I think it says a lot about who we have in the educational field. And so we need to leverage that as much as possible and then turn around and support them. So.
And I would think that our educators out there, the people in the trenches, so to speak, that are actually delivering education to students virtually or in the classroom, could be an amazing source of innovation. And if we need to be listening to those folks, because I'm sure there are teachers out there that had no idea when COVID started how they would do this online, but have come up with brilliant innovations and ways to engage those kids that maybe goes above and beyond even what the previous experience was. And we need to figure out a way to mine those experiences and that brain power that's out there and apply that moving forward, because there's an old saying about, generals always fight the last war, not the next war. And so the next war will be something else that will cause us to need to do something different in our education. And if we learn from what COVID has taught us about remote education, it's going to help us no matter what that next war is. So whether it's another pandemic or some other some other innovation that comes about in education that's related to broadband connectivity and remote learning, we should be thinking about that and using this experience as a platform to make it better going forward. So a little bit of a soapbox there, but I really get excited when I think about the opportunities that this tragedy, this pandemic could potentially present for our society moving forward. So anybody else have anything else they want to add to the discussion at this point? We're running toward our end of our hour.
I'll jump in there and talk about some success as well. I mean, I think that you're right. More time was dedicated to learning this new technology, ironing out some of those issues and bumps and barriers that we were going into. And I think in the future, we do have the tool now to use to reach more people broadly. I meet with people regularly now all across the country, where before I wasn't, right? I can actually have more meetings. My students could actually go to more class and learn more, right? Because of this, because you're not moving around. There's no passing periods, right? You're not driving to school. there's a lot of things I think that we can do to use this technology in a way to really educate people.
And I think about how the use of remote education can add so much diversity to a student's experience growing up and learning, because they'll have excellent teachers in the classroom, but through broadband and through the remote connectivity, they can have access to excellent instructors around the world, and how nice that is, how good that is to, not just the education part of developing our children, but the social development of our children. So that's pretty exciting too.
Yeah, especially I think when you look at augmented reality and
Right.
virtual reality, the way 4K, 8K may be used in 10 years to create a surrounding experience or immersive experience.
That's a great point, Todd, because having a internet connection that's good enough for what we're doing right here on Zoom may not be good enough for that next thing, that virtual reality, that enhanced, experience, that is coming and will certainly be part of every aspect of our lives, and probably will be part of our educational structures as well. So, well, if anybody else has anything else they want to chime in on, we have any other questions to our group that are attending? I don't see any right now, but you got to
Please send me one of those stealth iPhones.
Yeah,
it's technology. I'm ready for that.
It only works in certain ways. It won't work when I turn the Zoom off, unfortunately. Well, and that's probably fortunate because I'd lose it anyway. So I want to really thank our panel. Fantastic discussion here this afternoon. Gregebeling, I'll thank him remotely. Kendra Alexander from Winterset Community Schools, Isaiah Knox with Urban Dreams, Joel Lundstrom with Des Moines Area Community College, more lovingly known as DMAC. And thank you to everybody who participated. This is being recorded and will be put on the Greater Des Moines Partnership YouTube page. So if you missed part of it, or you think, hey, I need someone to watch this, this was an important discussion, please feel free to direct them to the Greater Des Moines Partnership YouTube page to find it. So thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your afternoon.
You too. Thanks, bye.